Joining us now is Kimberly Mutcherson. Kimberly, you run a law school, and you're certainly familiar with our nation's laws. What's your sense of the claims that you're hearing right now about the issues with the vote count? And does the Trump side have a good case? Is it still early to say this?
I don't think it's too early to say this. I mean, my sense is that what we're seeing is, one, the implementation of a plan that this administration was setting the stage for long before we came to this day. And two, that the lawsuits that we're seeing filed are a real sign of desperation. And the judges are being responsive to that, right? They're saying, you're not bringing us any evidence. And these are not just democratically appointed judges. These are judges who were appointed by Republican presidents. And they're saying, there's nothing here, right? There's nothing that we're seeing that tells us that there's a problem with the count, that there's a problem with the ballots. And so we're going to proceed as we should.
And, I think that's important to point out, as you just mentioned, that these are judges appointed by both Republicans and Democrats who are saying, show me the evidence, show us the evidence. It's not there.
Right.
So is it too early to say that the Supreme Court and newly appointed Justice Amy Coney Barrett, that they could help him in winning? What's your take on that?
I think that because of what we're seeing in the lower courts, that is a sign that we might not even ever make it up to the Supreme Court. I mean, there are some questions about, again, where we might see Amy Coney Barrett going, and that we have a conservative majority on the court now. But I would like to think that the justices on the Supreme Court at their core believe in our system and believe that people should be able to cast their votes, and that validly cast votes should be counted. And that's what we see happening right now.
I've heard a lot of legal scholars talk about this over the past couple days leading into the election, and over the past couple nights where I haven't been sleeping and watching a lot of MSNBC, but saying that the Supreme Court really does not want to weigh in, does not want to get into these cases like they did in 2000. How do you agree with that? Do you think that is necessarily going to be the case?
I do agree with that. I mean, I think that, a lot of us can look back on Bush v. Gore, and there are concerns about, one, the legitimacy of the court that comes from the Supreme Court deciding a presidential election based on, arguments about the votes and the count and all of that good stuff. And so I do think that, that this court, and particularly Chief Justice Roberts, cares a lot about the legitimacy of the court. And if they can stay out of this, I think they would love to stay out of this.
Now, let's talk about the other side. Joe Biden has not come out against packing the court, which, for those of viewers that may not understand, it would mean increasing the number of members of the Supreme Court, and then also putting as many judges as possible on the federal circuit courts. But he said that he would appoint scholars to review our nation's courts and give him a recommendation for reform on those. Is there anything that you would recommend?
Well, one, I mean, if we look at the number of justices on the court now, it is the number that corresponds to what was the number of federal circuits at one time, which was 9. And now we're up to 13 circuits. So there's an argument certainly that you could make that if we want to have a number of Supreme Court justices that represents the number of circuits around the country, that would be a reason to actually add some justices to the court. I mean, we know how important our judiciary is, and one of the ways that we know how important it is the amount of effort that has gone into the 4 years of the Trump presidency to get more judges appointed. I mean, hundreds of judges that have been appointed by this president over the last 4 years. Courts matter, and courts are important, and we want our courts to be representative of the country. And so one of the things that requires is, taking time to see who's on the bench, who's been appointed, who's been elected, and to really think about whether our justice system is diverse enough to actually mete out justice in a country that is as diverse as ours is.
And, New Jersey voters legalized or said that they wish to see recreational marijuana legalized this election day. And now there's a lot of talk about expungements for people who have previously been charged with possession. How far along is that process? We heard from New Jersey State Senate President Steve Sweeney, who says that they're hoping to pass some legislation to decriminalize it in November. But what more needs to happen? And do you think that what the legislators are putting forward go far enough?
Yeah, I mean, so I think, right. So as a starting point, you need to have that legislation that really implements the decision that New Jersey voters made. And I happen to be one of those voters, and I'm proud of what folks did in this state on Election Day. But then you also have to have an entire system in place to figure out how you're going to regulate that system. And it was done, obviously, within the context of creating the dispensaries for medical marijuana. Some of that can carry over, but potentially not all of it will carry over. So there are a lot of layers of figuring out who gets a license, where do you get to set up, all of those kinds of things are going to be important. And so that's a process that will and should take time. And, I am certainly not the only one who believes very firmly, and I think Governor Murphy believes this too, that a piece of this type of reform has to be expungements, that there are so many people whose lives have been really deeply and negatively impacted as a consequence of laws that made marijuana possession criminal, who deserve at this point to have their records expunged so that they can go on with their lives.
And we've seen a wave of black women making history lately. New Jersey recently put a black woman on the state Supreme Court, and the nation could potentially see Kamala Harris as vice president. How are you feeling about that?
Couldn't be more excited. The new New Jersey Supreme Court Justice, Fabiana Pierre-Louis, happens to be a Rutgers Law alum. She was one of my students when she was in law school, and she's a wonderful person. And so it's amazing to see that happen. It's devastating that these kinds of firsts have taken so long, frankly. The first black woman to be admitted to practice in the United States was admitted, Charlotte Ray was admitted in 1872. And we've still got so far to go and so many firsts that are still happening. But, I think about my children. My son is 15, my daughter is 12. The first president that they'll remember is Barack Obama. And then potentially the vice president that they're going to remember really well is going to be Kamala Harris. And I think that that's the kind of thing that really helps young black and brown children and young girls really think about, what is my future? What can I achieve in this country? What's available to me in this country? And that's something that I am not cynical about at all. I think it's tremendous. I think it is a mark of progress, but it certainly doesn't tell us that we've gotten everywhere where we need to go.
Well, I'm looking forward to a more diverse future as well. Kimberly Mutcherson, the first black female dean of Rutgers University Law. Thank you so much for joining us and taking time today.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me.